Awesome. We are you are the Colorado team. What high school do you represent?
East High School in
East
Denver.
High School. Where is that?
It's in Denver, Colorado.
Okay, yeah, I knew the Colorado part. Didn't know. But great. It's been a while since I've been to Denver or Colorado, but it's a lovely place, and I hope you have I assume you're in DC right now, or close.
Yes.
And are you having fun?
So much fun.
For sure.
So much fun. But of course, you had to go and win the top 10 or top 12, and now instead of out tooling around the city, you're sitting here answering our questions. So, what could be any better than that? So, so congratulations for being here today, and I hope you wish you the best of luck, and I hope you have plenty of time to explore and have adventures there in Washington before you come back as members of Congress in a few years. But my name is Tandy McConnell. I did not have the pleasure to meet you guys yesterday. I was a professor of history at Columbia College in South Carolina for about 20 years. And then about a few years ago, I decided to do something different and became a high school history teacher and teaching social studies and AP courses at Ridgeview High School in South Carolina. It's an honor and pleasure to be with high school students like you with so much promise and ability right now. I'll ask my colleagues if they will introduce themselves. So Sue, will you tell us who you are?
Hey, Colorado, nice to see you again. I'm Sue Leeson, Senior Justice, Oregon Supreme Court. And I didn't realize yesterday that when I saw the WorldStride tables, that meant that you really are in DC. I thought we were all just Zooming from home. I hope you're having a great time.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I am Margot Lambert. I am a professor of history at the University of Cincinnati, Blue Ash College. My PhD work was at Georgetown, so definitely enjoy DC. It's a wonderful city. And I also love Colorado. My favorite place there probably is Estes Park. Well, Rocky Mountain National Park, but Estes right outside. So very nice.
Would you introduce yourselves and your teacher?
My name is Hadley Brown, and I'm a junior.
My name is Leo Nichinsky, and I'm a junior.
My name is Clara Artley, and I'm a junior. My name is Catherine Strong, and I'm a junior.
My name is Lucas Krambeck, and I'm a junior, and our teachers are Mandy Hostetter and Matthew Fulford, and our coach is Rick Wedgel.
Oh, well, very good. It's really fun to be with you, and we're your Unit 1 judges, and we're interested in the philosophical and historical foundations of the American political system. We're asking you today question 2. The foundation for good government is the rule of law. John Adams once wrote, "Good government is an empire of laws." How, if at all, is the rule of law embedded in our founding documents? What challenges to the rule of law, if any, have we experienced in our history? In what ways, if any, has the rule of law been important to the preservation of a free society? If you're ready, please begin.
Rule of law is the idea that everyone is held accountable to laws that are transparent, consistently applied, and independently adjudicated. One of the grievances set forth in the Declaration of Independence was that King George III had refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. A government based on the rule of law was therefore essential to the founders. The Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land under the Article 6 Supremacy Clause, sets out a structure for protecting the rule of law. The legislative branch creates laws through Article 1, Section 8. The executive branch ensures proper execution of the laws through Article 2, Section 3. And the judicial branch interprets the law through Article 3, Section 2.
The Constitution ensures that the government is held accountable to laws through the system of checks and balances, which prevents one branch of government from overstepping its authority. In Federalist 78, Alexander Hamilton explained why an independent judiciary was especially important to the system. Courts ensure that Congress only passes laws that are consistent with the Constitution. Laws are made to be consistent through the establishment of procedural due process, including trial by jury and standards for appointed judges. Lastly, the existence of a constitutional government epitomizes the idea that there must be restraints on government and a priority on the people.
However, we have experienced challenges to the rule of law throughout American history, such as the overreach of power by the executive branch. For example, John Adams used the Alien and Sedition Acts inconsistently, punishing his political opponents and violating the First Amendment. Later, Andrew Jackson simply ignored the Supreme Court's ruling in Worcester v. Georgia, forcibly removing the Cherokee people in what is now known as the Trail of Tears. Ronald Reagan invaded Grenada without direct congressional approval and also sent illegally obtained funds to rebel groups in Nicaragua explicitly against the will of Congress. In the 21st century, President Obama conducted numerous drone strikes on Syria, all without direct congressional approval. States have also prioritized their own interests over the rule of law, such as in the nullification crisis, when South Carolinians claimed that they could nullify federal laws they disliked and therefore refused to enforce federal tariffs.
Another challenge to the rule of law has been the unfair mistreatment of historically disadvantaged groups in the criminal justice system. The Iowa Law Review found that white-collar crimes are more likely to receive shorter sentences than recommended by federal guidelines. Additionally, there is a 13-to-1 sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine, with 77% of crack cocaine offenders being Black. This demonstrates how the criminal justice system fails to make laws equally enforced. The founders believed that a free society is one in which people maximize their standard of living with a government that protects them. Rule of law has been paramount to the preservation of natural rights and thus a free society. For example, the doctrine separate but equal in Plessy v. Ferguson was later found to be inconsistent with the rule of law, as it meant that the same laws protecting the right to an education were not applied consistently across races.
Historically, many challenges to the rule of law have been properly resolved, holding government officials accountable and maintaining a free society. After Brown v. Board, some Southern school districts blatantly refused to enforce this ruling, leading to the case Cooper v. Aaron. The Supreme Court's unanimous decision to hold these districts accountable ensured the Supreme Court's power under the Supremacy Clause. The rule of law additionally upheld a free society through the Watergate scandal. Congress indicted Nixon and ordered a subpoena for the incriminating tapes, but Nixon claimed executive privilege, meaning that he could not be held accountable for the tapes. The Supreme Court ruled against this argument in U.S. v. Nixon. Nixon complied with the court ruling by providing the tapes, avoiding a crisis within the U.S. government and upholding the rule of law. Societies with rule of law are able to protect certain fundamental rights, which ensures liberalism. Whereas in societies with no consistent accountability for the application of laws, these rights can be revoked at any point in time. We are now open for questions.
Very good. And you left us a great many things to think about. Just going back to one of the points that you passed through very quickly, and I think it's an important point. You talked about the U.S. v. Nixon case and Nixon's claim of executive privilege. Nixon complied, you said. Why did he comply? I mean, the Supreme Court had no police power, no police force. The Supreme Court did not govern any military forces. The president controlled all of those things. Why did Nixon surrender to the demands of the Supreme Court, knowing what the consequences could be when he had the power not to do that? It might not have been a legal power, but he had the actual power to ignore that, just as Andrew Jackson did. Why did he obey?
Nixon took this action because of his own personal morals and ethics. He decided that it was in the country's interest because he was the president and believed in the American system, that this was the right action to take to comply with the Congress's subpoena and to surrender the tapes.
I would disagree, possibly more pessimistically. An alternative explanation could be that Nixon was afraid of public opinion or afraid of the threat of impeachment and believed that he could garner more political power by complying with the judiciary.
I think that's a very good point. You mentioned presidents who ignored the rule of law and overstepped their bounds. Jackson, John Adams, which is part of why you won't see a statue of John Adams in Washington, D.C. But is it ever okay for the president to be above the law? And I personally thinking about Abraham Lincoln here. Was that justified? Is it ever justified?
I think in the case of Lincoln, it was a somewhat retroactive justification in that after he violated some aspects of procedural due process in the Civil War, he asked Congress to later approve his actions. So in this case, war was the reason that he believed that those actions needed to be more expedient, but arguably that is still a threat to the rule of law.
I would also additionally say that at the modern era, I would have personally liked to see a little bit more of a presidential approach to the issue of COVID-19. I would believe that, and I would be personally well happier if the president was able to issue a federal level mandate over the issues of COVID-19, exercising a potential breach of the rule of law, just because that is a local power usually left up to the states.
To summarize, in times of national emergency, sometimes breaches of the rule of law in the interest of the common good are justified.
You've indicated that the rule of law was upheld, for example, in Brown versus Board, which then led to Cooper versus Aaron. Does the rule of law to be workable require the cooperation of the other branches when one branch has acted?
I would argue, yes, all branches are needed for the enforcement of rule of law. If the judiciary is to rule in a Supreme Court case such as Brown v. Board, when the legislative branch or the executive branch do not take measures to enforce this law, the law ultimately is essentially dead in this case. This is why it led to a case like Cooper v. Aaron in order to enforce these districts to enforce the ruling in Brown v. Board of Education.
Well, and I'm thinking more about the actual troops sent into Little Rock. But that's an executive asserting an extraordinary. What if Eisenhower had said, "Ooh, I think that's just too dicey. Brown versus Board is such a controversial decision. Best to just let the states work it out over time." What do you think would have happened?
It's important to understand that the founders deliberately divided the power between the different branches of government, meaning that although the judicial branch can make rulings, they cannot enforce them, which shares power. So of course, Eisenhower's troops in Little Rock were needed in order to actually enforce the rulings of the Supreme Court, and Congress needed to fund those troops because they have the power of the purse. And so all
but
of
my
the
question is, what if it had gone otherwise? What if Nixon and Congress had said, this is too dicey a subject, it touches too much on states' rights, we're not going to do anything? Would rule of law just been a pretty word?
I think it essentially would have taken the majority of the power out of the federal government, as what would happen is the states would have the right essentially to circumvent a federal government ruling, which would be a collapse in the system of federalism in my mind.
Also, I would argue that we would see vast amounts of discrimination and political polarization if that were to be the case. There are many states, such as Texas and Nevada, that lean in a different direction when it comes to old original at the colonial time, a level of discrimination against people of color. So I would say that we would have certain states implementing different policies than other more liberal leaning and more equality just states.
So let's just bring it up to date a little bit and then I'll get off the stage. The current controversy is over voting rights. The Supreme Court effectively gutted the Voting Rights Act. States are now in the active process of placing all kinds of voting restrictions and gerrymandering on what appear to be racial and economic grounds. Is this an example of a collapse of the rule of law going on right before our eyes? Or is this an example of the rule of law working effectively through our political system where nobody's dictating?
I would agree with Justice Sotomayor's dissent in Shelby County v. Harris, in which she government must enforce the 14th and 15th Amendments in order to uphold American democracy, especially with the issue of gerrymandering. I would recommend a constitutional amendment mandating there be independent commissions that oversee the drawing of House district maps like we have in Colorado as a solution to this problem.
Another solution that would help the problem of gerrymandering is an additional amendment that changes the House to a proportional representation as seen in Israel, which has been very successful there.
The founders very clearly recognized that the Constitution would be very imperfect in maintaining the rule of law, as stated throughout the Federalist Papers. But the rule of law is not an absolutist game in which any threat to the rule of law causes a collapse of the rule of law. There are still things that can be done to perfect it further, amendments to the Constitution to fix voting rights being one example. So gerrymandering, though it persists as an issue, is not necessarily the end of the rule of law or indicative of a greater trend of rule of law being completely denied in the United States.
I love the idea of amending the Constitution, but it is extremely difficult. Look how difficult it was for women to get the right to vote via the Constitution. They attempted for decades to do it via state by state, until finally Alice Paul organize them congressionally. So what other ways besides a constitutional amendment could we address these inequities here?
I would say that an action being taken right now is the World Justice Project's initiative for the solutions to the rule of law. They have experts and practitioners across the world globally joining together in solutions on a biennial joining of everyone from these representative places in the world, talking about the ways in which rule of law has failed in their personal systems and how they can fix discrepancies on it in the future.
Additionally, in order to help solve some of the discrepancies that we are seeing in voting today, we can help programs to help everyone get a photo ID, which right now can be an expensive process, but we can help everyone do this and also create a national voting holiday so that all people are able to vote, especially those who may not normally be able to take time off of work to go vote.
I think the interstate electoral compact is also another way that states are taking power into their own hands to rectify the inequities created by the Electoral College. And this is an action that states can take on their own without a constitutional amendment.
All of this makes me wonder, is there a fundamental conflict between the rule of law and democracy? Both of these are ideals on which our country is based. And yet, based on a lot of what you're saying, they seem to be coming into conflict again and again.
Well, Aristotle argued that rule of law could really only exist in a republic. So I think the idea that rule of law and democracy somehow conflict is just simply not true. I mean, Aristotle stated that rule of law had to be accumulative, or valid laws had to be decided on by common opinion rather than just a single kingship. So civic participation is fundamental in the rule of law.
I would actually like to disagree with my colleague. I think that we saw a huge challenge between the two on January 6th in the insurrection. We saw the insurrection challenge our democracy, which rule of law did end up upholding, but we saw the justice being taken through Trump v. Thompson and Swalwell v. Trump, in which he was not found on counts for executive immunity.
I think it's important to note that in today's society, there are certainly threats to the rule of law. As my colleague just mentioned with January 6th, that we still have an extremely strong rule of law, although maybe not perfect. It's important to contrast our rule of law with other societies. If we look at what's happening right now in Russia and Ukraine, and even societies like China, those are authoritarian regimes without any rule of law. When we have a democratic regime, which does have rule of law and upholds it almost to the best of its ability, although not perfect.
So what do you think the rule of law index shows America declining from in the high 80s to now at 68? What's going on in the United States that seems so troubling from their perspective?
I think that extreme polarization in the country between different political parties and factions, may I finish my statement?
Sure.
Especially aggravated by social media and general politicians aggravating people and polarizing them on purpose to hate their neighbors is really hurting the rule of law in America. And if we want to change this, we need to emphasize civic virtue and help our citizens understand that our democracy is worth protecting.
Thank you.
Thank you. What an amazing conversation. We covered all sorts of territory in unexpected ways. I think one of the things, one of the comments about Nixon taking a pessimistic view, one can rarely be too pessimistic about Nixon, and particularly his commitment to the public interest. But on the other hand, you're right. He knew that he could not go against the Supreme Court and the rule of law and win. And so perhaps that was a triumph for the rule of law. Great conversation, great discussion. I'm glad you brought in the Iran-Contra affair. That's something I have not heard so far, and that certainly applies to this. And South Carolina and the nullification crisis. Again, that's probably a classic example that tends to get overlooked in this discussion. So thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful time today. And I hope, when do you guys go back home? Do you have any more time after today?
Yes.
We leave tomorrow.
Well, have some fun in the meantime.
Thank you.
I just want to say congratulations, well done. I loved how you all kind of worked together almost seamlessly. A great understanding of American history, great reasoning behind this understanding of American history. And I thought you answered my question about the amendment process and alternative ways of dealing with this is, I thought that was terrifically answered. I have to say, someone mentioned the rule of law has been upheld with January 6th. I say it's still up in the air. I say we're still hovering here. So that's a bit of my own pessimistic note. That's it. But anyhow, you guys were terrific. Thank you.
I agree. I really like your opening statement that sets up such an elegant framework where one could easily conclude, well, gosh, what could ever go wrong? And then you jump right into what could go wrong. In other words, ideals cannot be achieved automatically. They require a whole lot of work. I would love it if you would do some updated examples of nullification. Civil war is not the only time states have nullified federal law. My state's doing it all the time with its death with dignity law, with its marijuana laws, and now with its psilocybin laws, acting in direct contradiction to national laws and rules. And so this challenge of federalism in the context of rule of law remains one that I think is alive and well, and it would strengthen your presentation even more to be dealing with some of these contemporary issues. When we had that discussion about why did Nixon comply, I think we're going to face the question, will Trump comply? And this now gets to your ending piece about the importance of or the risk of polarization and the use of social media, because it could be that American populism is going to turn out to be one of the greatest threats to the rule of law we have encountered. I like rule of law when I agree with the outcome, but to heck with rule of law, I'm going to become a populist when I disagree. And to me, that's one of the many, many things you've given me to think about that makes this question even more difficult than it was coming in. And for that, I think you deserve great kudos. And I really have appreciated an opportunity to spend 2 days with you now. So thanks.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Very well done. Thanks, guys.